Yes. Okay, we are live.
Cool.
Welcome everyone to the new live stream of Drive-by Bytes for YouTube channel, and also if you're coming through our meetup group Chennai Tech Radar, this is going to be our presentation on CKA, Certified Kubernetes Administrator tips and tricks, and also going to deal about the new syllabus covered in CKA 2020 and some insights from somebody who recently cleared it. So I have Vijay with me. Vijay, who has been in IT for around 15 years. He had worked as full stack Java developer and had been managed multiple applications, both COTS and on-prem. He is currently managing Kubernetes on-premise with multiple containers running with multiple clusters. Uh, he is working for T-Mobile as a senior software engineer. Welcome, Vijay.
Thanks, Narayan.
Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Narayan. Hi, I'm Vijay, senior engineer at T-Mobile, a telecom-based company here in the US. We do manage and run Kubernetes on-premise, running 60,000 containers, and um, we have like 40 plus Kubernetes clusters that we administer. Thanks, Narayan, for giving this opportunity to go over and um, have a useful session. I'll get started on the session now. So CKA, as you guys know, CKA is Certified Kubernetes Administrator. We'll go over some of the requirements first and top level view of all the different topics that the uh, exam refers to and test your competencies. So we'll go over those topics and we'll break down by the weightage, and we'll also deep dive into different topics and how we can get you guys helpful in achieving this certification. Moving on. So this session is basically to help you out to on your path to CKA. So it's presented by Bribe by Bytes. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, I highly recommend subscribing to the channels. We have different topics that we will be covering today. That's all covered in our YouTube channel as well. So I would highly recommend subscribing to the channel as well. So to be or not to be, so that's the question here, right? So we all want to be certified. Of course, Kubernetes certification is highly valued in the industry because it's hard to crack as well, right? So unless until you don't have a good understanding, it's really hard to crack this exam. So the important thing is understanding the concept here. So let's get into it. So today we are dividing this particular session into three different sections here. First, we'll go over all the requirements, the exam requirements, the system requirements, the test area, and all sort of stuffs, all the domain areas that you will be tested against in CKA. And in section 2, we will deep dive into each of those sections and the subtopics within each of those domains. And we will go over some tips and tricks that'll be useful for you when you're taking up the exam. And section 3, we will give some pro tips and some other insights that will be really helpful for you. Yeah. Okay. Let's get into it. Okay. So exam and system requirements, right? So CKA, it's based off of new syllabus. Earlier, it used to be a 3-hour exam with 24 questions, but starting this September 2020, they've revised into a new syllabus with a new exam pattern. So it's only about 2 hours exam, and it's a total of 17 questions. Pass percentage is also 66%. It used to be 74. They've slightly cut down on the pass percentage. So it used to be really tough, but right now it's they've cut down on the percentage, and the pass percentage is 66%. The exam cost is $300, but I would say if you're checking up the Linux Foundation website, you might see some discounts coming your way. Every now and then they do run some promotions. Even maybe in Black Friday, you can expect some promotions where you could get discounted price for the exam. So I highly recommend looking out for that if you're planning to take up the exam, to get that discount. um, the other things, system requirements that you would need is your own computer with or a laptop with webcam, microphone enabled, because it will be proctor monitored. So there would be a person monitoring your screen and you as well. So these are all the general system requirements. The browsers that they recommend is Google Chrome or Chromium. Sometimes you may face issues with Google Chrome. You could also install Vivaldi is another browser, so you could just install that as well. It works with that. Thirdly, you would need a proper, reliable internet connection. Um, so make sure you cover all those things before you're taking up the exam, right? Um, so and about the exam, right? About the window that will open up when you get into the exam. So it's a web terminal. So you would see your questions loaded on the left side of your web page. On the right side is a web terminal where, yeah, you would be given instructions to log in into the clusters. So um, you may have to you will be given instructions on how you can log into the cluster and get started with your task. So left side is your questions, right side is your web terminal where you go and do your stuff. So there's no multiple choice questions, it's all fully practical problems that you're going to solve. So each question you would just get in, do your stuff there. So very important, make sure when before you attempt a question, you are logged into the correct cluster. Follow the instruction that will let you know how you access a Kubernetes cluster. There are multiple different Kubernetes cluster that you need to access as part of the examination. So make sure you're logged into the right cluster. And you're allowed to open one additional tab in addition to the exam window that you have it opened in your browser. So that one additional tab, you could open kubernetes.io/docs or github.com/kubernetes. So or a blog under Kubernetes. So any subdomains under kubernetes.io/docs, you are allowed to open. So you could look up for some topics. um, you could browse different topics there. If you have any uh, if you have any questions or if you have any doubt, you could just go check up certain things. You could pull up spec, for example pod spec. You could go search for it and get the pod spec and speeden things up by copying the spec YAML file and doing stuff there, right? All right, and you're also allowed to use extended external monitor. If you have an external monitor at home which you feel comfortable with, you're allowed to do that as well. All right, moving on. Test area. So this is really important, right? So before you start your exam, the proctor who is monitoring your screen and your space, whatever room that you're taking in, right? So he would ask you to pan your webcam or a laptop cam around the room that you're taking. So you have to show your laptop. If you're having a laptop and you're using the webcam of the laptop, you would have to just show him around the room what's there, what's not there, and the desk area as well where you would be taking up the exam, and underneath the table as well. So they would check every place, making sure you don't have any sticky notes or you don't have any paper notes that you may be using. So the proctor would, before starting the exam, he would make sure that everything is covered. And um, you would also be asked to provide your ID. So it could be your passport, it could be your driving license. So you would be asked to show your ID proof. So make sure it's clearly visible to the proctor before taking up the exam, right? And you're allowed to have some water and stuff. So make sure those are there and you're prepared for it. Another important thing is the timing, right? So the timer starts as soon as you log into the exam window. But sometimes you may face issues where the web terminal, where the questions are loaded, it may not be fully functional. You may have some issues here and there. So in that case, you might start the exam maybe like 15 minutes later than your scheduled exam time, or maybe it could be 30 minutes. In my case, it was like after 30 minutes is when I was able to get in. My Chrome had some issues and I had to install another browser, and they walk me through the process. So there is a chat window as well within that exam window that you open. So you have three things, right? You have your left side, the questions get loaded. On the right side, you have your web terminal where you go SSH and then you connect to different Kubernetes cluster and answer your questions. Then you could open up a chat window as well if you want to chat with the proctor, asking some questions and such. So my exam started like 30 minutes later, but they do keep track of the timing, so you don't have to worry about that. So you can constantly check with them by chatting with them, like what's the time left. So they keep track of the time for you. You can ignore the timing that shows on your window. Okay. Alrighty. Moving on. Okay, so let's go into the section one, which is our top 5 domains that this particular exam covers, right? So this is the syllabus for the CKA 2020 exam. So most of the topics are rolled under this broader category here. So for example, if you take cluster architecture, installation, and configurations, most of these subtopics are rolled under this larger domain. And on the right side you could see the percentage as well, so the weightage that each topic is given. Very important troubleshooting, because that's what really tests whether you're capable enough to administer a Kubernetes cluster or not. As an admin, the troubleshooting is a really important topic that you would be tested against. So that's why the percentage of weightage against troubleshooting is higher. And so 25% for the installation, Kubernetes cluster installation, 15 percentage for weightage for the workloads and scheduling and stuff, networking, storage 10%. So this pretty much covers your 5 different topics and their weightage. Yep. All right. Okay. So now let's deep dive into each of the exam topics, right? So this is where it gets interesting. So let's go over on each of the domains, and we'll also break it down into topics, and we'll go over some tips along as we move forward. Yep. Okay. First is the cluster architecture, installation, and configuration. The weightage for this domain is 25%. So here you can expect questions about how you would bootstrap and install a Kubernetes cluster using kubeadm. So we've put up links here. You could also watch our YouTube channel for some of the topics that we have covered on installing Kubernetes through kubeadm. So it's a really useful topic that's covered on the YouTube, where you could watch how it's been done. You can expect questions from this section, like how you would use kubeadm to bootstrap and deploy a Kubernetes cluster. So I highly recommend you guys practicing it. There's a lot of free Kubernetes cluster that you could spin up. You could use Minikube. There's kind as well, where you could spin up a multi-node Kubernetes cluster. In our YouTube channel, you can watch our video that explains about using the kind to spin up a Kubernetes cluster. So there's instructions, step-by-step instructions as well. So you could go over that, right? So the important point here is you should know how you can spin up a Kubernetes cluster using kubeadm, right? I also felt one of the topic that was published by Kelsey Hightower, which is learning Kubernetes the hard way. I found it really helpful, because he documents step-by-step instructions from the scratch how you would build a Kubernetes cluster. A lot of so if you wanted to know how you would build a Kubernetes cluster, right from spinning up the virtual machine, configuring all the networks, and deploying Kubernetes, I would recommend going over that topic, Kubernetes the Hard Way by Kelsey Hightower. We have put up the link as well, so you could practice it as well. I've done it 2-3 times, practicing the website, understanding each and every step, right? That was really helpful for me. So if you're just looking at from the perspective of say just clearing CKA, then you don't have to know the whole steps by memory, or like the exact steps, but I would say um, but I would say uh, check all the different concepts there, right? Like for example, the default path where the Kubernetes components are deployed. For example, kubelet, what is the default path for kubelet? What's the default path for etcd, right? And how you would stop and start a service. For example, how what happens, for example, if kubelet is stopped, how you would start it. So those sort of concepts you can get it from there, which will be really helpful in your when you're taking up the exam, right? And expect questions in role-based access control. So you may be asked to create a user access. So you would be given a user ID, and you'd be asked to provision a user access for him, right? So familiarize yourself with roles, role bindings, and how the role binding ties the user with the Kubernetes cluster role or a role. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. Um, there's another topic as well, implement etcd backup and restore. So as part of Kubernetes cluster installation, you would also encounter how you're gonna uh, configure etcd, so which is one of the Kubernetes component as well, right? So expect questions from CKA, where you would be asked to implement backup and restore operations for etcd. So we put up a link as well, so go over those. That'll be really helpful, right? um, all the curriculum topics, right? So it's all available. All the curriculum topics are all available in the official Kubernetes documentation, which is kubernetes.io/docs. So in case you don't remember something and you need to know, you could just go into kubernetes.io/docs, search for that topic, go over that, and you could use that in the exam. So that's allowed. That's legally allowed, so you can quickly refer them from these links. I can't emphasize enough. So um, when you're talking about installing Kubernetes, how would you master it, right? Not by not by just watching these sessions, or not by watching a video. Uh, we would we would recommend watching the video, but then you practice along as well, right? So we highly recommend watching our video, watching our session, but then practice, right? So only then, when you get into the exam, um, you are in the flow to um, do stuff, because it's not a multiple choice question again, and so it's only practice that makes things easier for you, right? Okay. So the YouTube links are in the screen. So once the session is over, you could download this presentation and you can get those links. Yeah. All right. Okay. Moving on. The next topic, or the domain that we will go over, is workloads and scheduling, right? So this is one area. This is one domain where you could score 100%, right? You may make mistakes, or you may not get it right on the cluster installation, because some of the questions might be tricky. But then this is one domain, I would say, you could score the full marks or the points, because these are all super easy topics that you could practice and master it. For example, understanding the primitives used to create um, self-healing application deployment, right? So you would be asked questions on init containers. So what an init container is, how you would load stuff using init container, right? So um, definitely expect questions from init containers. So you would be asked to say, let's say, load a file through the and container onto the your primary or the main container as well. So practice, go over kubernetes.io, or watch our YouTube video as well around some of the topics that we have covered over there. Deployment. So practice very well how to work with init containers and deployment. So you should be able to know what a deployment is, how you can configure stuff, daemon sets, and you don't have to worry about stateful sets. There isn't much questions around stateful set, but focus on init containers, focus on deployments, um, focus on daemon sets, how you would deploy a daemon set, and also you could expect questions on uh, taints and tolerations, like what a taint is, what tolerations are. So why does a pod doesn't get scheduled on a particular node? So all those stuff, concepts like taints and tolerations, you can expect questions around that. So you would be asked to find out which worker node has taints, how many worker nodes has taints. So those sort of questions you can expect. So uh, go over these topics, especially the init container, taints and tolerations, deployments. Most of these spec, so you could just pull up from kubernetes.io/docs during the exam. So for example, if you were uh, asked to use or show a concept about init container, you would need a spec, right? So when you're given your lab questions, so you could just go to kubernetes.io, pull up the init container topic section. You could pull up the pod spec with the init container. You could just reuse that. So you could copy that, put it in a notepad, and modify stuff, and then you could use it. Yeah. And awareness of manifest management and common templating tools. Yeah. So there are different templating tools, different ways of managing Kubernetes objects. So this links talks about different way of managing and templatizing the Kubernetes objects in the YAML file. So customize is one tool that's used for templating Kubernetes, where you could have the placeholders replaced with actual values. So customize is really useful when you're doing CI/CD pipelining to deploy applications onto Kubernetes. So customize will be really helpful to templatize your deployment manifest and replacing the placeholders with the actual value. So go over those concepts as well. Use config maps and secrets to configure applications. So these are all easy topics that you could score your full points, right? So learn how to uh, use config maps. There are different ways to create config maps. There are different ways to load them, right? For example, how you would use config map to set environment variable for your application. How you would use config map to load a file into into the container, into the Docker container, right? So all the different options are really documented very well with good examples on the Kubernetes official website as well. So practice playing around with all the different options of config map, how you can create different ways of creating config maps and different ways of using them um, into your Kubernetes, right? Same goes for secret as well, like how you can create secrets in different ways from a file, from literals, and by specifying keys, and how you can reference those secrets onto your Kubernetes Docker container, right? So these are areas I'm stressing enough because these are topics which are straightforward and easy to score. So practice them so that you don't miss out on these questions here, right? Um, know how to scale application. This is another area where you can expect a question. So you'll be asked questions around like maybe how you can replicate, how you would replicate to 5 instance, right? So your deployment. So how you would do that, and how you would manually scale it, and how you would auto scale it. So auto scale based on CPU, memory. So expect questions around that, right? So go over those scaling concepts. Um, so how you would manually scale to 10 instances, or how you would auto scale based on some metrics, monitoring metrics like CPU, memory. Super useful, super easy as well. So it's easy to go and score those points there. Understand deployments and how to perform rolling update and rollbacks on deployment. Yeah, this is expect questions in this topic as well. Um, so you would be asked how you would do a rolling restart, or how you would roll back, for example, from one version to another earlier version. For example, these are real-time scenarios, right? So these are real-time scenarios which you would expect when you are an admin, when you are an admin to a Kubernetes cluster where there is some deployment that somebody is deploying might go wrong, and they would want to roll back to a previous version. So as an administrator, you should be able to guide and roll back the changes of the deployment. So these are some of the um, key questions that you may be asked as well. So get yourself familiarized with these. There are good commands and good documentation available. Check out our YouTube as well. Yeah. So yeah, the reason it is only 15% is kind of this is easy topic. So that's why I would say get the 15% weightage covered, fully covered. So you can go over those. Okay. Moving on. Workloads and scheduling. Another 15% weightage. Um, it's okay. It's kind of easy if you practice a lot on this section. Um, for example, there might be parts that are running crash loop, or it never started. So you would be asked to troubleshoot what's going on with the part scheduling, right? So you could do that in different ways. Like you could do a describe on the part, see what went wrong. You could also do a get event on the namespace and see if there was any error message being reported. You could also check the application logs or the logs of the container. So these are three different ways where you would go and troubleshoot why a pod was not scheduled, right? So with those indicators, you could be able to, it could be due to the resource limits. For example, a pod would have been assigned higher resource than what the limit was. So that's the reason Kubernetes scheduler couldn't schedule your pod, right? So these the links that are put up there covers those as well. Um Assigning pod to a node. So that's an important area. You can expect a question. There's a video link as well. Follow our video. So you may be asked a question to schedule a pod on a specific worker node. So you may need to use some the schedulers. The link is there where you could put in a node scheduler name and the node name and where you want to schedule your pod. So the link is there, and uh, expect multiple schedulers. This is another area where you will be tested. So there's a default scheduler, then there's a custom scheduler that you could run as well. So you may be asked questions around how you can specifically use a specific scheduler to deploy your pods. So there are spec available. All these are spec, right? So the YAML file contains all the different options, where you can see the different options that you can use to configure those. For example, there's an option to schedule your um, pods with using a different schedulers. So um, you could go over those link and see how it works, right? Um, then manually schedule a pod without a scheduler. This is a definite question. So um, uh, go over this section that talks about the static pod. So how you would schedule a pod without a scheduler, right? So it talks about configuring kubelet in order to schedule a pod without the scheduler. So um, small topics, but then there's enough scope to learn, practice stuff, and score the 15% weightage scoring point as well on this section. So if you are not sure during the exam for any reason what should be the spec field that you need to use, you could use something like kubectl explain deployment dot spec dot pod template. So kubectl would let you explain, and so get yourself familiarized with kubectl explain so that you could see what the full manifest spec of a deployment is, or a full manifest spec of a pod is. So the explain command will really come handy if you are not sure what are the fields you need to use. So you could use that. Yeah. All right. Moving on. 20% weightage for services and networking. So over this, go over the concept of understanding how networking configuration on the cluster node works. So most of this would be covered if you are practicing standing up Kubernetes from the scratch. So how the networking works, how the pod communication works, how the services are configured. All these concepts are pretty much overlap if you go over the steps of Kubernetes installation, because a lot of our topic are covered already on the installation steps. Um, and you should also be able to know how to do a DNS lookup for a Kubernetes service, how to do a NS lookup for the pod, what is the fully qualified domain name for a pod, what's the fully qualified domain name for a service. All sort of questions you could expect around this topic in services and networking. Um, Also understand the different types of service. So we have cluster IP, node port, load balancer, and the um, external IP. So you could expect questions around the services. You may be asked to create a service and map it to the parts. So based on the selector labels and such. So questions, you can expect questions around how you can route traffic through the Kubernetes service onto the pods. So you should be able to configure, create a service. You should be able to expose them, and then you should also be able to validate if the service is really mapped to the pods or not. So go over and practice those concepts. There's a YouTube video link as well on that. Also understand concepts about ingress controllers, what an ingress is, how you create an ingress resource, what are the ingress rules. Um, those would come handy. So the ingress would ingress is a gateway that would allow external traffic to come into the Kubernetes and map them to the internal pods. So go over those as well. Um, know how to configure and use core DNS. Again, core DNS, again, this would be covered as part of the Kubernetes cluster installation from scratch. Go over and practice the Kubernetes the hard way as well. It covers this topic of configuring the DNS. So uh, I highly recommend doing that. Container network interface plugin, Flannel, Calico. You could just understand these concepts. Um, uh, so just basic awareness should be good enough. You may not be tested deep into this topic as such, but it's good to know. So yeah, all right. Storage, another area to score full marks. because all it does is test about how you could mount a volume, persistent volume, and how you would load files using those persistent volumes. So how the storage class is linked, what are the different access modes, so how the storage class is linked to the persistent volume claim, and how you would refer it and mount it to your application container. So there's a really good example in the Kubernetes IO docs as well, and there's a YouTube video as well. So how you can use those storage classes, access modes, volume modes, and how all these pieces tie in together when you create a PVC, and how you could refer them or mount them into your pod container. You can also expect questions around the ephemeral storage as well, which is empty dir. So how you would create an empty directory, which is an ephemeral storage inside the pod, and how you would create files inside it. So expect such questions as well. So it's not only about persistent volumes, how you would mount them. Also check about the ephemeral storage. Um, and how you could load them as well. So empty directory, there are different options available to load volumes, empty directory, persistent volumes, and such. So go over these topics. Will be super helpful. Not a complex topic, easy to understand. So just one single topic that you have to focus here, which pretty much covers your 10 percentage weightage. Yep. All right. Troubleshooting. 30% of your examination is mostly on troubleshooting, right? So you would be asked, you can expect questions like um, worker node might be down, so how you would bring that worker node up, right? That's one troubleshooting question. You could also expect another troubleshooting question like this, right? So where the kubelet might be down, or an etcd could be down, right? So uh, you would be asked to go check those and bring those service up. And you may be asked to check why is pod not able to be scheduled on a particular worker node. So you would run some get worker nodes, see what's going on there, SSH into those VMs, um, check the processes running on those worker nodes, see what's going on, bring them up if need be. So all those sort of troubleshooting questions you can expect around here. So around why a node is not starting, how do we configure etcd, how do we start up etcd service. So all these questions you can expect, and a lot of this are all overlap on learning Kubernetes the hard way, where from the scratch, if you understand what the steps are, these are all pretty much covered. All right. Let's see if there are any questions in the chat. Um, okay. Any questions so far, guys? Do we need to remember the entire commands? Sida. Okay, that's a good question, right? Not all of them can remember the questions. Sorry, the commands, right? So you don't have to remember the entire commands. But if you do remember, it speedens things up, right? Because it's 17 questions, 2 hours. Time is of the essence here, right? So it's super, it consumes a lot of time. For example, if you're spending too much time on a particular question, it takes away a lot of time. So if you can memorize those commands, for example, like the get commands and all those useful commands, it's well and good, but you don't have to remember those commands, because kubernetes.io/docs basically has a lot of examples. You could go refer them. it's really hard to remember each and every command. For example, installation, right? um, uh, you can remember certain things, but not all of them. That's where the Kubernetes IO docs comes in handy during the exam, where you can go refer them, copy paste them. You could use those, so you are allowed to do that. All right. Any other questions? We can take a couple more questions as well, I guess. Okay, this question is from Abhishek Sharma. How much time need for preparation for the exam if we start from scratch? Okay, so that depends. Um, so if you're already working on Kubernetes on a day-to-day basis, right, then it becomes a lot easier. So if you already know the basic core concepts of Kubernetes and you're working day in, day out in your job as a Kubernetes admin or in some one way or the other, if you're daily practicing your Kubernetes, that really helps. Maybe you could spend a week, focused time of a week, then you can prepare yourself for the exam. But if you're not using Kubernetes actively on a day-to-day basis on your job, if you're just learning Kubernetes as a newcomer and you want to get into the exam, it's really hard. So you need a lot of practice, especially with those kubectl commands. Those should come in real fast. Like, I work on Kubernetes day in, day out. So for me, taking the exam, it was I was racing against time. So imagine that, right? So you should be fully aware of the core Kubernetes concepts, and you should be comfortable using kubectl commands. If you're not using those on a day-to-day basis, then it might take a month or so for you to keep practicing and getting used to those kubectl commands. So because that's what would let you go past the exam. Cool. Next question. Do we have any other question? This is another question from Vijay Vardhan. Please tell me around 10 troubleshooting regular questions coming in exam. Around 10 troubleshooting regular questions. Okay. We are not supposed to reveal any questions as such, because that's part of the non-disclosure agreement that we sign upon. But on the troubleshooting, general questions you can expect is, um, why a pod is not restarting, right? What could be the reason? How you would solve to bring up that pod? Why a worker node is down? How you would bring that up? Why you cannot communicate? Why the kubectl is down? Why there is an error on the HCD? So you might be asked such questions where you have to SSH into those worker nodes, look for all the processes, and bring them up. And there could be some wrong configuration as well. So you may have to correct those paths as well and restart the service. So all these sort of troubleshooting questions that you can expect. In other case, the service might be mapped to a different label selector. So you may not see the actual service mapped to the pods correctly, which means you're going to have a routing issue or a networking issue, right? So the pods are not going to receive the traffic if the service is not mapped to the pods based on correct labels. So that would be another troubleshooting questions. Um, so expect these kind of questions, right? So uh, and you may be asked to um check and report what is the fully qualified domain name for a service. So how you would do that, right? You need to run some ns lookup commands inside the container, to against the service, and document those. So these are some of the common troubleshooting questions that you may be asked. Yeah. All right. Okay. Another question from Siddha. Are those 17 questions will be same for the next time, or questions keep jumbled for the next time? So Siddha, you're asking on your second attempt. Is it going to be the same questions or different questions, right? I believe it's going to be the same questions. Pretty much you can expect, maybe there could be some slight deviations, but I would say 80-90% would be the same. So with little variations, um, but yeah, it would be mostly the same. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's continue. Uh, we'll go over some cool tips, tricks now. So now that we have come to the end of the discussion here, so we went over all the 5 different domains and the subtopics. We will go over some tips and tricks here. So the very important thing I would stress on is practice, practice, and practice. Because I say this because I work in Kubernetes on a day-to-day basis actively, and I felt the time wasn't enough to complete all the questions. So I would say keep practicing and also make use of the Kubernetes IO/docs as and when it's needed. For example, if you need a pod spec, if you need a deployment spec, if you need a spec for init containers, don't go and memorize and keep typing that in. Go look up on the Kubernetes IO docs, copy paste it into the notepad, edit it as needed, and then put it into the system as a YAML file and apply it using kubectl, right? The tools that you would use for the exam, right? Let me give you that the tools that I've used for the exam. Kubectl, that's one thing. So as soon as before you start the exam, I would recommend setting the alias. For example, as you see in the screen, for kubectl, set up the alias in the shell script. The it could be bash shell or the zsh. So go set the alias for k, alias k for kubectl, kg for kubectl get. That would save a lot of time. So initially, just set those aliases. So that will save a lot of time, right? So kubectl is one tool that you would use in the exam. Vim editor. So you would go Vim, open up an editor, copy paste the part spec or the deployment spec depending on the questions you asked, and you would save those YAML file and apply it, right? So Vim is another tool that you would use. You would also use systemctl. Systemctl is a tool that's used for starting, stopping service. For example, the kubelet, um, kubeproxy, your etcd. So the systemctl tool is really useful to start and stop those services on a Ubuntu server. So if you're not familiar with systemctl, go Google online, look up for some basic commands on systemctl and get yourself familiarized with that. Um, what other tool? Kubeadm is another tool which you would use to bootstrap and spin up the Kubernetes cluster. So that's another tool that you would use in the exam. etcd-ctl is another CLI tool. So using the etcd-ctl CLI, you would be asked to take a snapshot or back up the data store. So that's another tool. So kubectl, set up immediately the alias for kubectl, systemctl, get yourself comfortable with basic commands of systemctl, etcd-ctl, kubeadm for installing Kubernetes cluster, I think, and the Vim editor. So these 5 tools are the tools that I've used for the exam. Another cool tip that I've done was, don't spend too much time on one particular question, right? So this being 17 questions, you can run through each question, all the questions up front. So you don't have to take one question at a time. So run through all the 17 questions before you start the exam. See which ones you are confident enough to take it first, right? So go attempt those. And as you start attempting, right? So what I have done is, which I felt really helpful for me was, in a notepad, I started tracking my questions. For example, I put in question number 1, what weightage it is, how much weightage percentage it is, whether it is 5%, whether it is 2%. So I would put in that weightage. So in your question, you would be in the question on the corner, you can see the weightage percentage of each question as well. So 17 question with different weightages, right? So you would write those weightages as well. Question number 1, 5% weightage, whether done or pending, right? So that's how I kept track of each question. So if you're super confident of attending maybe the 7th question, go put number 7, what's the weightage percentage, whether done, right? That way, as you keep answering questions, you could count your total percentage that you have done, and if it is crossing above 66 percentage, which means you're pretty confident that you're going to pass. So that way it's really helpful to keep track of how much questions you have answered, what the total add up percentage is, whether you've crossed beyond 66%. And you can focus on double checking if you are, let's say you've gone beyond like 75% or 76%, you have answered those questions, and you don't have to take new questions. Rather, you can double check your existing ones whether you've done it correctly or not, right? So this kind of tracking will help you um, evaluate where you are during the exam. um, you can bookmark important Kubernetes docs. So in your Google browser, even before the exam starts, you can bookmark those kubernetes.io/docs for different topics like init container, how you schedule a pod on a worker node, taints and tolerations, all sort of topics, right? Deployment, kubeadm, installing Kubernetes through kubeadm, all those pages under Kubernetes IO/docs, you could bookmark and keep them ready. So during the exam, you're allowed to open one additional window other than the exam window. You could just click on those bookmarks, select the particular topic, and you can answer the exam questions by looking at those pages, copying the spec and all those things, right? Uh, what other things? um, Familiarize yourself with lot of useful concept under kubectl cheat sheet. So if you're googling kubectl cheat sheet, there's so many useful commands, that I would highly recommend practicing it, because that will come in handy for answering some of the questions. So go over those kubectl cheat sheet link as well. um, and like I said earlier, kubectl explain dash dash recursive, and you could do a dump of all the full spec of either deployment, daemon set, or a pod using kubectl explain. So um, highly recommend doing that. So in the exam, so open up the notepad, copy paste the spec, modify it, and then just supply it into the Vim editor and then apply it through the kubectl. That would save a lot of time, right? So you could go attend 7th question or the 10th question first, come back to the first question or the second question. So you don't have to take it in order. You can go any order. I would recommend going through your easiest or the confident questions first, then come back to the tough ones. Don't spend too much time on one question at all. There's just 2 hours for 17 questions, and if you're stuck up anywhere, just move on to the next one. Yeah. Okay. All right. Right. Um, yeah, there's a lot of useful commands that we have put in here. For example, kubectl get parts dash o wide dash dash show labels. So it's all about labels and annotations. So use those commands, kubectl get parts dash o wide with dash dash show labels. That'll show you all sort of information that's configured for the pod. You could use dash a to list all the pods on the Kubernetes cluster. Important thing is making sure anytime before you attempt a question, make sure you're logged into that cluster correctly. So there will be instructions on how to access those clusters. Just follow those instructions so you're on the right cluster answering the right question, right? We don't want to end up in a situation where you are on a wrong cluster and you're trying to answer a question. So make sure each question you attempt on the right cluster. um, all right. Yeah, practice, right? That's what I would say. So only practice can help you to crack this exam. Without that, no matter how many times you just reading through the concepts or just watching video, it's not going to help, right? There are some free credits available that I would highly recommend making use of. For example, there's a $300 credit that Google provides, where you could spin up a virtual machine and you could deploy Kubernetes as well. So there's a $300 credit that you could make use of and see how you could spin up a VM, how you can deploy Kubernetes from scratch. And there's a lot of free options available as well. We have Kind as well. We have a video for that. You could use Kind to deploy a multi-node Kubernetes cluster as well. You could do that. You could use Minikube to learn stuff. So there are different ways to um, spin up a Kubernetes cluster and learn those concepts, right? So I would say this exam is for anybody who's already aware of Kubernetes concepts, core concepts, and have good working flow with kubectl commands. If you are not using kubectls on a day-to-day basis, or if you're not using Kubernetes on a daily basis, this exam would be tough, because it really tests your knowledge on Kubernetes. So yeah, for questions or discussions, join us at our social media links that we have put up. YouTube, you can connect with us on YouTube. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. You can connect with us on Facebook. So you could reach out to us. We are planning to do a lot of videos as well on various topics. We have done few topics, but we are planning to do more topics as well on Kubernetes. That'll make all the different topics easy to understand, and we will break it down and make it super simple. Yeah. All right. We have come to the end of the session. Any questions? I think we can take a few questions, I guess. Yeah. Vijay Vardhan, which is better, imperative or declarative method? Not really clear about the question here. So the declarative method, you mean the YAML imperative or declarative method?
Okay, let me add to that. Yeah, we are talking about the imperative and declarative method in Kubernetes, the way we call the commands. Imperative is more about imperative is mostly used for quick win. Like you could create commands for quick wins. Like you want to test something, you want to experiment something. But when you want to really use some repetitive deployments, and then if you want to really go YAML changes and then apply it
Right.
repetitively, if you want to use in a deployment flow or something, then it's better to go with the declarative method. So
Right.
there's nothing called better between these two, but in reality, when you go to a live environment, when you're really deploying something regularly, you won't be running these commands manually. You will be putting up some, CI/CD process or automation in place, and that's where the declaratives helps because they
Right.
save the states across, and then it can help.
Yep. Yeah.
Just adding to that. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of time you won't use commands like kubectl create pod, kubectl expose service. You would mostly have it as a pod spec YAML file or a service YAML file in real scenarios, and you would just use those. Even in the exam, I would recommend doing that rather than doing a kubectl expose service or a kubectl create pod. I am weak in troubleshooting. Vijay Vardhan, please do videos on troubleshooting questions. Definitely, Vijay. Yeah, we will definitely go over those. I think that's an area that many people struggle. I think, yeah, in the coming future, we would definitely publish some videos on troubleshooting. I think, yeah, I think there's not many people that have done that. I think it'll be really good for us to take that in and do it. Siddha, Are we allowed to open Notepad in the exam? Yeah. So the Notepad is the one that comes along within inside the exam window. So the exam window has questions, web terminal, chat, and Notepad option. These are the four that's available there. So the Notepad is one within the web window of your browser, not your machine Notepad. Any other questions? Keep your questions coming, guys.
Yeah, Vijay. I think we don't have any questions right now in live. I think, but people can go ahead and post it as YouTube comment and also connect with us in other social media. We'll also try to share this slides link
Yeah,
probably in the description and also in the pin it as a comment in the YouTube video itself. So go ahead and share it with your colleagues, friends, and everybody. Thanks, Vijay. It was
yeah,
really insightful, even for me. It gave lots of information about how to go about approaching it because Kubernetes as such is a
right.
huge topic, and then I think there should be a clear way to approach it to tackle the certification as an exam. Even
Right.
for experienced people, I think this is going to really help because it gives a pathway. Because day in day out, when we start using Kubernetes, we'll be stuck with certain set of commands based on our
Yeah,
cluster setup and our organizations.
yeah,
So probably this is very helpful. Thanks for this session, Vijay. I
definitely.
think we can end this one and then we'll have more and more coming. For people who are live, do subscribe to the channel so that you will directly get notified if you are going to go live again. We are also posting lots of videos around this. Go ahead, look at in our playlist that covers Kubernetes, simply explained and stuff like that. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Jay, you want to add anything else?
No, Narayan, thank you for giving me this opportunity, right? So it was really a good platform to share our experience, and definitely it was really good questions as well. Like, for example, definitely we would consider posting troubleshooting topics as well, which is one area that not many people cover. We would take that feedback as well, and we would go about doing that. Yep.
Yeah, great.
Cool.
Thanks everyone, and thanks to Rajesh who was working in shadows. He is part of our channel, but he is working in shadows for us to make this live happen. Thanks everyone. See you in the next video. Thanks and bye.
Thank you. Bye.